Is a professor of political science and international relations at Ibn Haldun University, and he joins me now live from Istanbul. Professor, we have been talking about Finland's accession into NATO for almost 1 year now. But it wasn't Finland that started the application alone. It started the application along with Sweden. Now, Finland is there. It is all set to become the 31st member of NATO, while Sweden's membership bid is still in limbo. And that is primarily because Ankara still has a lot of concerns when it comes to the presence of terrorist organizations within Sweden. Do you feel in the near future Sweden will also become a NATO member, or that is very unlikely at this point?
I think Turkey demonstrated that Turkey is willing to support the NATO enlargement, NATO open door policy. This is one thing very important. And as a consequence of the Madrid agreement roadmap, Finland fulfilled all the expectations, all the conditions of the Madrid roadmap. So there were security concerns for Turkey support for PKK cooperation, or their efforts in those countries have been limited, diminished, and some new legislation have been issued in Finland. And there were some sanctions to Turkey which were abolished, and also cooperation in other areas. So I think if Sweden prefers the same path, so dealing with the terrorist organization PKK and their other organizations, and limits organizational framework as well as the financial framework, financial capabilities of the PKK, and demonstrate some goodwill and negotiation rather than pushing and using different methods against Turkey, I think it is likely. So unfortunately, in the last couple of years, the Turkish-Swedish relations have been escalated due to this Quran burning issue, or attacks against Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, rather than dealing with the issues in line with the Madrid Memorandum. Swedish politicians decided to shift the focus of this debate to a different direction, so more cultural, more religious. So I think if they return to the origins of the Madrid referendum and they make some concrete achievements, concrete legislation on that regard, we can see similar path for Sweden as well. But there needs to be some trust-building issue as well, because in the last several months, the relations have been damaged due to these developments. So I am optimistic about Sweden's accession as well.
Okay.
But two things needs to go. So trust building as well as their legislation, and the government and other parties in Finland should also demonstrate that they will stick to the agreement and terms of the agreement if there's a governmental change.
But nevertheless, today is a very historic day for NATO. Finland is all set to become the 31st member of the alliance, the 7th NATO country on the Baltic Sea. And in fact, it will become a NATO country that shares the longest European Union border with Russia, more than 1,300 kilometers. Now, Professor, certainly there are many ways to look at Finland's accession and how Russia is going to react to it. But prior to Russia's war in Ukraine, there was an expectation and perhaps a concern among many experts in the West that Russia does not want NATO to expand. And that is primarily why, according to them, Russia invaded Ukraine. It wanted to send a message to the West. But what has happened here is the exact opposite. NATO is expanding. Finland has become the 31st member of the alliance today. And if Sweden keeps its promises that it made as part of the Madrid summit, perhaps it could also become a NATO member in the future. So what is your navigation through this?
I think Finland's concerns about Russian expansion is, solid. I mean, historically speaking, Russia previously controlled some of the areas, invaded some of the areas in Finland. So they have some historical concerns, historical grievances. But during the Cold War time, Finland tried to be more neutral in this ground. But unfortunately, Russian occupation, invasion of Ukraine changed the mindset of Finnish people and returned to some of their historical, historical fears. So, we have to respect also these fears. So it is the Russian involvement in Ukraine that triggered this move. Otherwise, we know that Finland was happy with their neutrality. They were contributing to, their infrastructure was quite interoperable with NATO. They have very strong army reserve forces and they were well prepared. But none of these countries in the Baltics can singly oppose to Russia in case of some threat. So I think it should be considered a fair move from Finland. Unfortunately, it may generate some negative response from Moscow as well, because Finland has a 1,300 kilometer border with Russia, which means an additional border with NATO countries, NATO, and which may also increase security expenditures of Russia. But to what extent this relationship will be maintained? So will Finland rather play a much more neutral or much less threatening posture with Russia, or how the Russian-Finland border will be used by NATO? NATO is very crucial. So if NATO installs some military equipment and if there are some rapid moves from NATO, I think Moscow will respond. But this will, sooner or later, there will be some response from Russia as well. But the degree of this response will depend on how Finland will situate itself.
Right, and Professor, I'm sure that you have followed this whole accession process very closely. And you may remember about 5 to 6 months ago, there were some experts in the Western world saying that Turkey is against NATO expansion. Turkey does not want NATO to expand. But here we are today. Finland has become the 31st member of the alliance with the ratification of Turkey. So what kind of message do you think this day sends to those people?
I know, in Brussels, in Washington, D.C., there are some circles who try to argue that Turkey is the Trojan horse in NATO, diminishing NATO's security. I think these are so unfair assessments. Turkey had contributed to NATO security during the Cold War times. It was very dependable partner and demonstrated support, solidarity with NATO for a long time. Unfortunately, some of the NATO member countries had threatened Turkey's security, couldn't understand Turkey's major security concerns, Turkey's combat against terrorist organization in its southern border and other security concerns. So this actually, including United States and France and a couple of other NATO member countries, had somehow supported or did not limit the functioning of some of these organizations, and they issued sanctions against Turkey. So this generated some gap between Turkey and some NATO member countries. But Turkey reiterated its position position in NATO enlargement. Turkey constantly mentioned that we are supporting the open door policy. We would, however, expect new member countries to respect our security concerns. Since we're going to be allies, they should also feel, problematic when Turkey's security is threatened. Right. Otherwise, we cannot contribute to NATO's collective security. So this was clear. And I think Finland understood this issue. There are certain countries who still do not respect Turkey's major security concerns. But I think this gave the message that if Turkey's security concerns are respected, I think Turkey is supportive of this move. But the other messages, Turkey is seriously concerned about its security concerns in southern border and combat against terrorism.
Okay, Professor Talha Kose, please do stay with us. Right now we are getting live pictures from Brussels where we can see NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg is speaking to Ukraine's foreign minister Kuleba. They're speaking right now. Let's listen in.
infantry armored vehicles, personnel armored carriers, everything that Ukraine needs for a successful counteroffensive. Of course, I intend to discuss, as you mentioned, the strategic plans for ensuring sustainability of support that Ukraine receives. And of course, the third biggest issue that will be in the spotlight today is Ukraine's accession to NATO. I think we are all happy for Finland today, and Finland's accession is a clear message that the time to revise all strategies and all perceptions has come. And there is no better solution to ensuring Euro-Atlantic security as a whole than membership of Ukraine, eventual membership of Ukraine in NATO. So thank you for having me here, and I'm looking forward to fruitful discussions.
Thank you. Welcome.
All right, we just saw NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg greet Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, and we also heard the Ukrainian Foreign Minister basically say that Ukraine would also like to become a member of NATO. We still have Professor Talha Kose here with us. So, Professor, you heard what Foreign Minister Kuleba said about his country joining the alliance. Now, certainly this is an aspiration that Ukraine has had for many years. Do you think it's likely to happen anytime soon? Do you think it will ever realize?
Well, it is quite unlikely, especially after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So it will be quite difficult for NATO to be partnering or being part of a conflict with a nuclear power like Russia. So unfortunately, the main tension was related to Ukraine's Ukraine interest for EU and NATO membership. But this war, unfortunately, this invasion, make it much more difficult for NATO to directly engage against Russia. So the cooperation, there are different models and modes of cooperation. But for the moment, I think if there is not a stable or some ceasefire or some kind of ending to this war, Ukraine will be unlikely to be member of the NATO. Even if there's an agreement, there are certain certain risky areas. I mean, to what extent, who will own Crimea, own Donbas region? So, well, if Ukraine has a counteroffensive to regain territories invaded by Russia, will NATO be part of this? So there are too many questions and risks with regard to Ukraine's membership to NATO. Okay. And I think the NATO member countries will be unwilling to take this risk. We know that some of the European countries are also not in favor of this move.
All right, Professor Talha Kose, thank you very much for talking to us here on TRT World. Really appreciate your taking out the time.